Why did no one believe her that day? Why did the most experienced men in the room look right through her, as if competence had a weight she hadn't yet earned? Sat at the edge of the mission table, quiet, hands folded, eyes steady. The air in the tent smelled of diesel and wet canvas. Around her, the team talked fast numbers, coordinates, times, but their glances kept skipping over her, landing on everyone else instead. She didn't interrupt. She never did, not when the tone told her everything. They thought she was background noise, the sniper brought in to fill a contract line, a formality. They had no idea who they were leaving on the sidelines. She'd been underestimated her entire life. You learn to carry that kind of doubt the way soldiers carry packs, heavy at first, but after a while you stop feeling it. Or at least you pretend to. That night before the helicopters lifted, she sat alone beside the landing zone, cleaning the scope on her M40. She did it the same way her grandfather once cleaned his Remington back in Montana, slow, careful, respectful. The same ritual, just a different war. He used to say, "A rifle like your word, kid. Keep it clean and it won't fail you." She could still hear his voice when the wind pushed through the tree line. The jungle was waiting. They called the op extraction. Some logistics project gone bad in the southern Philippines, 12 civilian engineers stuck in a compound as local insurgents closed in. The company had hired a private team to pull them out before the situation collapsed. Was Overwatch, long-range precision, nothing heroic, just the kind of quiet job she was built for. The team leader didn't like it. He was old-school Marine, chest like a barrel, handshake like a dare. He looked her up and down during the briefing and smirked. "You'll stay at the rally point," he'd said. "We'll handle the hard part." She nodded, copy. Arguing never changed minds like his. She'd seen his type before. They mistook silence for softness, patience for fear. But patience, she'd learned, was a weapon. At 19, when she enlisted, no one thought she'd make it past basic. Too quiet, too small. Then she shot expert, outscoring half her platoon. At 22, she made it through sniper school. The instructors tried to break her down, they always did, but she learned to slow her heart to half its beat, to breathe between seconds, to wait longer than anyone else. Montana winters had taught her patience first. The Corps just gave it a trigger. She never told her story for medals or glory. She told it because people needed to understand what quiet could do when it decided to fight back. The night before the mission, rain tapped against the tin roofs of the barracks. The air felt electric, the kind of stillness before chaos that made her chest tighten. She wrote one line in her notebook, "If they won't see you, let the results speak." Then she closed it and tried to sleep. At dawn, the two came in low over the treetops. Rotor wash flattened the tall grass and filled the air with the smell of fuel and wet earth. The jungle stretched out below, dense, green, endless. She climbed aboard, gear strapped tight, rifle wrapped in its canvas sleeve. No one said much on the flight. Men checked their weapons, cracked jokes about humidity and snakes. She looked out the window, watching mist drift across every shadow felt alive. They landed 6 clicks from the objective. From there it was all foot movement, thick brush, mud like glue, sweat burning through her eyes. Split the team. 8 moved toward the compound. Stayed behind with a comms operator and a young security tech named, barely out of his 20s, still carrying the nervous energy of someone who hadn't learned how to hide fear yet. He tried small talk at first. She didn't answer. She was already building a map in her head, terrain lines, possible cover, wind direction. The ridge 400 meters out gave a clean line of sight across the valley. Perfect overwatch. She lay prone behind a fallen tree, adjusted her scope, and watched the jungle breathe. Every sound mattered, the rhythm of insects, the shift of leaves, distant echo of movement that didn't belong. Scrolled his phone, muttering about signal strength. Then came the call. "Contact, heavy contact." His voice snapped through the radio, clipped, strained. Multiple hostiles inside the compound, taking fire from the north and east. Froze, the sound in the background wasn't just small arms. That was a PKM machine gun. Sustained bursts, close. Extraction compromised, the comms operator said, panic rising in his throat. Hold position, ordered. Do not move, do you copy? Static chewed the rest of the transmission. His heart didn't race. It slowed. Every part of her focus narrowed to the valley below. She could picture it, her team pinned, wounded engineers trapped inside, the helicopters waiting for clearance they'd never get under fire. She'd been here before, years ago, on another ridge in another country. Back then, she stayed put like she was told. 2 Marines had died because she followed orders instead of instincts. She swore she'd never make that mistake again. The comms operator turned to her, eyes wide. What do we do? She didn't answer, not yet. She checked her wind flags, leaves twisting eastward about 8 knots. Humidity thick. Distance to the compound, roughly 2 kilometers northeast. Her finger traced the worn edge of the scope. She keyed the mic. I'm moving to support. Negative, his voice cracked through static. Stay at the LZ, you're not part of the... Then the channel went dead. Looked at, you stay here. He hesitated. Ma'am. She was already moving. The jungle swallowed her within seconds. Branches slapped her arms. Vines caught her boots. Every inch felt like resistance. The air was hot enough to choke. She moved low, fast, silent, the way she'd trained for years. The sounds of the firefight grew louder with every step. For 40 minutes she climbed, legs burning, lungs on fire. The crack of gunfire echoed off the ridges, sporadic, frantic. She could almost hear the fear behind it. When she finally crested the high ground, she saw the compound below, smoke rising, figures darting between walls, men pinned near a drainage ditch, some tending to wounded. A machine gun nest on the north flank hammered the building with tracer fire. She set her pack down, wiped her face, and slid the rifle free. 540 meters. Elevation dropped 30 meters, wind steady from the east. She adjusted her scope and let the world fall away. Her breath slowed. Inhale, half hold, exhale. The trigger broke like glass. The gunner dropped. She shifted, fired again. The assistant slumped beside him. For the first time since the op began, the valley went quiet. Confusion rippled through the insurgents. Shouts in Tagalog, panic, men running for cover. She reloaded, shifted position 10 meters left, fired again. A man with an RPG went down. The radio came alive. Who the hell's shooting? His voice, disbelief cutting through the noise. She didn't answer, she was busy. Every shot bought them seconds to stop bleeding, to breathe, to move. She tracked targets like shadows, never rushing, never flinching. The rifle's recoil was a heartbeat, her heartbeat. When the last hostile broke and ran, she lowered her weapon. Smoke drifted low through the trees. Her throat burned from the air. She stayed on the ridge until the came, the thrum of rotors rolling through the valley like distant thunder. The wounded were loaded, one by one. The engineers, too. She didn't wave, she didn't need to. By the time the last bird lifted off, the jungle was still again, as if it had swallowed everything that happened. Watched the horizon until the sound faded. Then she slung her rifle and started walking back alone. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the firefight. It's what happens when the noise stops, when all that's left is silence and the question that never really leaves. What did it cost you this time? She didn't know yet, but she would. She didn't remember the walk back, only the silence. The kind that doesn't comfort, the kind that presses on your chest and reminds you that the world moves on, no matter what you've just done. The jungle was wet with nightfall when finally reached the rally point. Was gone. The comms tent stood half-collapsed, radio hissing in broken loops of static. For a long time she just stood there, helmet in hand, listening. No one came, no one spoke her name. She sank to the dirt and leaned against a tree, her body finally catching up to everything it had done. Her hands trembled now, though not from fear, from release. She held her breath for 4 hours straight, and it was only now in the quiet that the weight of it all came back. In the distance, faint rotor echoes, extraction birds heading home, without her. She looked up at the stars, what little the canopy allowed, and let out a dry laugh that sounded too tired to be human. It wasn't victory, not the kind anyone cheered for. It was just survival. 3 days later, they debriefed her in Manila. Air conditioning, fluorescent lights, bottled water. The kind of sterile comfort that never belonged to people who just come back from dirt and blood. She sat at the far end of the table while the company's legal team sorted through papers. The project manager droned about diplomatic protocols and stared at his hands like they'd betrayed him. 23 confirmed hostile casualties, the project manager said. 0 friendly losses. 12 civilians extracted. Precision engagement credited to an elevated position west of the compound. Said nothing. The silence stretched. Finally someone asked, who was on that ridge? No one answered. Looked up, his eyes found hers. He didn't look angry, not exactly, just changed. It was her, he said quietly. The room stilled. The legal counsel nodded slowly, made a note, and said something about reviewing future Overwatch protocols. Just like that, her name entered a system that didn't know what to do with women who saved lives in places no one saw. When the meeting ended, stopped her at the door. You disobeyed orders, he said. She nodded. You also saved my team. She nodded again. He hesitated, a long pause that carried more apology than words ever could. You'll be lead Overwatch on all future ops, he said finally, if you're willing. She met his eyes. I'll take it. He gave a small, humorless smile. Didn't think you'd say no. She didn't. That night in the hotel bar, the guy who once joked she needed a step stool to see over the barricade bought her a beer. Neither of them said sorry. They didn't need to. Instead, he told her about a missed shot in, how it haunted him still. You did what most of us hope we'd do, he said. You didn't freeze. She didn't feel like the hero he thought she was. Because for every man she dropped in that jungle, she remembered the way their bodies fell, the sharp, final stillness of them. She knew some of them weren't much older than, maybe just desperate, maybe just following their own version of orders. Sleep came in fragments after that. When she finally flew home, the Carolina coastline looked almost too calm from the air. Long stretches of green and gold, beneath a sky too bright to belong to anyone who'd seen what she had. Her cabin sat near camp, tucked behind a line of pines, the kind of place that hid easily from the world. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet one, polite, early morning runner, always fixing something in the yard. She let them believe she did contract logistics. It was easier that way. The first night back, she unpacked her rifle case, cleaned it again, not because she planned to use it, but because some habits keep your hands steady when your heart is. The scent of gun oil filled the air, sharp, grounding. She could almost hear her grandfather again. Respect the silence, kid. It's where you find out who you really are. He taught her to shoot, yes, but what he really taught her was how to wait, how to breathe through the noise of other people's doubt. And that lesson, more than any medal or mission, had saved lives. Days turned to weeks. She ran before dawn, worked her remote shifts, came home before dark. A normal routine, at least on the surface. But sometimes, when humidity pressed thick through the Carolina air, she'd pause mid-run, her breath catching on something she couldn't quite name. The jungle wasn't done with her. It came back in scents and sounds, wet soil, insects, the faint metallic taste of blood in the air. Memories didn't announce themselves. They just arrived. One night thunder rolled over the coast. She sat on her porch, rain sliding off the edge of the roof, and thought about the men she'd saved and the ones she hadn't. She remembered the first time she ever took a life, Afghanistan, 2014. A boy with a rifle, barely 17, standing on a rooftop. The shot had been clean, necessary, but years later she still saw his face sometimes when she blinked too long. It wasn't guilt exactly, it was weight, the kind that stays even when you think you've put it down. That's what no one tells you about war, that even when you walk away, some parts of it keep walking beside you. She looked at her hands that night steady and whispered to herself, "You did what you had to." But the words didn't feel like comfort. They felt like survival trying to sound noble. 2 weeks later, a package arrived from the company, a commendation letter and a bonus check she hadn't asked for. She left both on the counter unopened. Instead, she drove out to a shooting range an hour inland. The kind of place where the world went quiet except for the distant echo of bullets finding paper. She set up at the 600-yard line. Old rifle, same model as her grandfather. No targets shaped like people, just white circles against the sky. The first shot cracked through the silence, sharp, clean. The recoil hit her shoulder and something inside her loosened, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. For a second she felt grounded again, present. Not sergeant, not the quiet operator or the ghost from a jungle ridge, just someone trying to remember what it meant to feel human after being a weapon too long. That night she sat on her back deck, beer in hand, moonlight cutting across the yard. The sound of cicadas filled the space between breaths. Her phone buzzed once, an unknown number, a text. "Heard about, you ever think about coming back?" No name, no signature, but she knew the tone. Recruitment never came from strangers. She stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering over reply. Then she turned off the phone and set it face down. The night pressed close, warm and alive. In the stillness, she realized something. She wasn't afraid of the jungle anymore, not of the dark or the ghosts that hid in it. What she feared was forgetting who she became inside it. Because somewhere in that chaos, between the first shot and the last breath of silence, she'd found something the rest of the world never gave her. Respect. Not the kind you're handed, the kind you bleed for. She leaned back in her chair and let the night hum around her. The story wasn't over, not yet, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything to anyone. And when the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain, she smiled to herself. Because sometimes, the battle you win isn't the one the world sees. It's the one that finally lets you come home. She woke before dawn, as she always did. Not because of an alarm. Her body simply refused to let her sleep past the dark. The world was still. Rain had stopped sometime during the night. Outside, the trees dripped slow and steady, each drop hitting the porch rail with the same rhythm as her pulse. She made coffee without thinking. 1 cup black, same chipped mug she'd had since her second deployment. On the shelf above the sink sat her rifle case, closed but never far. For a moment she just stared at it, feeling the strange ache that came from being both proud and exhausted of what you were capable of. It had been 4 months since. 4 months since she'd moved through that jungle like a ghost no one believed in until it was too late to doubt her. And yet back here, in the quiet world, she felt more invisible than ever. The mornings were the worst, too still, too normal. She'd learned to crave the noise of a mission, the purpose that hummed under your skin when everything could end at any second. Here, the only sound was a refrigerator hum and the faint echo of her own thoughts. She tried to fill the silence, picked up remote contract work, reviewed defense logistics reports, even volunteered twice at a veterans' shelter in town. But nothing really stuck. Every time she looked at a spreadsheet, she saw coordinates. Every time she heard thunder, she heard rotors. You don't come home from war, not really. You just learn to live beside it. That morning she laced her boots and went for a run before sunrise. The pavement was slick, her breath visible in the chill. 10 miles of steady rhythm, just her and the dark road. Running was the only time her mind went quiet, when her muscles burned enough to drown the rest out. Halfway through, she saw a man standing by the fence line, smoke curling from his cigarette. Civilian, mid-40s, too still for someone just out enjoying the morning. When their eyes met, he nodded once, the kind of nod that says, "I know who you are." She didn't stop, but the unease followed her all the way home. Later that day, a black SUV pulled up the gravel road to her cabin. 2 men in plain clothes stepped out. One of them, the same man from the fence. She opened the door before they could knock. "You're early," she said flatly. He smiled, good memory. She didn't invite them in. "We're here unofficially," he said, flipping open a small folder just long enough for her to catch the seal Joint Task Force Liaison. "There's a situation near Mindanao. Similar profile too. Civilian contractors, unstable region, limited assets." She crossed her arms, and they need someone who's already proven they can operate in that terrain. Her pulse didn't change, her face didn't move, but her stomach tightened. "You think I'm going back," she said. He shrugged. "You're not under contract anymore, but you're on the short list. Command wants to know if you'll consult, just planning Overwatch assessment." She almost laughed. "You mean the part before everything goes to hell?" He smiled like he'd heard that before, something like that. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no, she just asked who else knows. "Just us and—" The sound of his name hit like a pulse of static. She hadn't spoken to him since Manila. They exchanged one message, a line of thanks she never replied to. She didn't blame him, but she hadn't forgiven him either. She looked past the man to the trees, green and dripping in the morning sun. "Give me a day," she said. They left her with a file, a thin folder, stamped advisory only. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she sat on her back deck and listened to the woods. Somewhere far off, a woodpecker knocked against bark. Wind moved through the pines. She thought about the jungle again, how it smelled before dawn, how the air clung to your skin, how alive everything felt when you knew it might be your last breath. Then she thought about the faces, the men she'd dropped through her scope, the ones she'd saved, the ones she couldn't see clearly anymore. Somewhere between those memories was the truth of who she'd become. That night she opened the folder. Satellite images, terrain profiles, local insurgent patterns, and a photo, black and white, grainy, of a compound that looked too familiar. She closed the file and rubbed her eyes. Not again. But she already knew she'd go. The next morning she called the liaison. "Consulting only," she said. He agreed. 2 weeks later, she was on a flight east, watching the horizon turn orange over the Pacific. This time she wasn't carrying a rifle, just a laptop and a promise she didn't quite believe, that she was only there to advise. But when the helicopter door opened over the jungle again, the smell hit her like memory, wet soil, diesel, gun oil. It was the same air, the same heat. Different coordinates, same ghosts. They landed at a forward base, small, temporary, surrounded by razor wire and fatigue. She walked past rows of tents and young soldiers who barely glanced up. They saw the badge on her chest and assumed she was logistics. She didn't correct them. Inside the command tent, waited. He looked older, less iron, more tired. When he saw her, he straightened, but his eyes softened in a way she hadn't expected. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. "Neither did I." They talked logistics first. Extraction patterns, radio relay failures, the same mistakes that turned operations into stories people only whispered about later. But underneath the professional tone, something else lingered, unfinished business. When the meeting ended, he lingered. "You ever think about that night?" he asked quietly. "Every day," she said. He nodded, "Me too." She turned to leave. He said, "We made it out because you moved when no one else did. Don't let anyone make you regret that." She looked back at him. "I don't regret it," she said. "I just wish it didn't have to prove anything." That night she lay in a cot, listening to rain hammer the roof. Every drop sounded like a countdown. She wasn't supposed to be in the field anymore. She promised herself that. But when the comms crackled around midnight, when someone shouted about a team pinned 2 clicks north of the river, she was already on her feet. The same rhythm, the same instinct. She grabbed her headset, coordinates. Static, then "We lost visual, sniper fire, unknown origin." She froze. Sniper fire. Someone out there had taken her place. But as she listened closer, she realized something: the pattern, the packing, the precision. It wasn't random. It was methodical, controlled. Someone trained like her. By her. She sat back down slowly. Months earlier, in her short stint training new recruits for the contract company, she'd mentored a small group, teaching fieldcraft, wind calls, concealment. One of them was a Filipina sharpshooter named Quiet. Disciplined, too much like. She reached for the comm again. She said into the mic, even though no one had confirmed it was her, "If you can hear me, hold your position. Use elevation. Don't let them draw you in." Silence, then faintly, "Ma'am." Her chest tightened. It was her. Her mind went still. She mapped the terrain in her head, every ridge and drop, every possible line of sight. She guided through it, calm and steady, her voice low but sure. Shots echoed in the background, 1, 2, then quiet. When the line went dead, held her breath until someone in the command tent shouted, "They're clear." The relief that hit her was sharp enough to hurt. She turned off her headset and stared at the ground. For the first time since, she wasn't the one behind the scope. She was the one saving someone who'd taken her place. And somehow, that felt heavier than any firefight she'd survived. Outside, the rain eased. Dawn crept pale over the treetops. Stepped out of the tent, watching mist rise from the earth. She'd spent years believing her worth came from what she did under fire. But watching someone else carry that skill forward, steady, unflinching, alive, she realized maybe that wasn't the point at all. Maybe the point was that someone else could take the shot now, and she didn't have to. She closed her eyes, breathing in the damp air, letting the sound of the waking jungle wash over her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped in what she'd done. She felt released by it. She didn't pack much when she left the base. A rucksack, her notebook, the same mug she carried everywhere. The ride back to Manila was quiet, prop wash humming through the fuselage, soldiers half asleep around her, the kind of exhaustion that made everyone's eyes hollow. Watched the jungle fade beneath them, a sea of green swallowing the scars they'd left behind. She thought about the steady control in her voice, the way she'd taken direction without panic, how her last transmission had ended with a single word, clear. It was strange, the way pride and sadness could exist in the same breath. For years had been the one steadying her scope, deciding which lives continued and which didn't. It was an unbearable kind of authority, one she never asked for but carried all the same. And now, watching step into that role, something in her finally loosened. Maybe that was the point. Maybe all along, it was never about proving she could do it. It was about making sure someone else could too. She closed her eyes and let the noise of the rotors drown her thoughts. When the plane touched down, she didn't wait for anyone. No debrief, no ceremony. She signed her release papers, walked out into the humid air, and kept going until the sound of the base was a memory behind her. Back home, North Carolina felt different, the light softer, the air thicker, the world somehow smaller. Her neighbors waved when she drove up the gravel path. She waved back. Inside, everything was where she left it. rifle case on the shelf, mud-caked boots by the door, the faint smell of cedar and coffee. She set her rucksack down and stood there for a long time, not moving, not thinking, just existing. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. Later that evening, she sat on her porch as the sun fell behind the trees. The sky was a soft bruise of orange and violet, and the cicadas were already starting their chorus. She thought about Montana, her grandfather, the smell of dry grass and winter wind. She thought about the men in that Manila conference room who never quite met her eyes, about quiet apology, about wordless toast. She thought about every time someone had said she couldn't, and how she'd never needed to say she could. She just did. The phone on the table buzzed once, a message from "Made it home, team safe, thank you." Smiled, just a small one, the kind that fades almost as soon as it appears. But it was real. She typed back, "Stay steady, trust your wind." Then she set the phone down, leaned back and watched the sky go dark. For years, she'd believed strength meant endurance, staying in the fight no matter the cost. But sitting there now, she began to understand something else, that strength could also mean walking away. That sometimes the bravest thing wasn't pulling the trigger, but choosing not to. She thought about the weight of her rifle, not just the steel and carbon, but the gravity of every choice it had ever made. Her grandfather once told her, "A rifle tells the truth about you. It doesn't care what you look like or who doubts you. It just asks if you're steady when it matters." She understood now what he really meant. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present in that moment between heartbeat and breath, when fear and focus balance on the same edge. She lived most of her life there. And maybe that's why she never quite fit anywhere else. As the night deepened, a soft wind pushed through the pines. It carried the faint scent of rain, the same smell that had followed her through the jungle, across oceans, into the silence of her cabin. She let it wash over her. She thought of the men who hadn't come home, the ones who never got to find peace in quiet moments like this. She thought of their families, their letters, the way grief leaves echoes even when time pretends to heal it. And she whispered into the wind, "I remember you." The stars came out one by one. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, her heartbeat felt steady, not because she was trying to control it, but because she didn't have to anymore. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled low across the horizon. She could mistaken it for gunfire once, but now it was just weather, just sound. And she realized she wasn't waiting for the next mission anymore. She wasn't waiting to be seen or tested or doubted. She'd already done everything she needed to. The world would keep moving. There would be other soldiers, other jungles, other names whispered through radios. But this chapter, hers, was done. She stood, stretched, and walked back inside. On the table by the door sat her rifle case. She ran her hand along the worn metal, tracing the small scratches like they were lines on a map. Then she opened it. Inside, the rifle gleamed faintly under the kitchen light. Clean, ready, always ready. She stared at it for a long time. Then, carefully, she removed the bolt, set it aside, and locked the case. Not out of denial, but out of peace. Some tools are meant for war, some hearts are not. Before bed, she wrote one last note in her journal. Respect isn't earned in the noise. It's found in the silence after. It's not given, it's lived. She paused, then added another line below it. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed the notebook, set it on the windowsill, and turned off the light. Outside, the wind carried the soft whisper of the pines, the same sound she'd heard in every place she'd ever fought to survive. And for once, it didn't sound like memory. It sounded like home,